A report from Amnesty released today has found that Twitter created a staggering amplification of hate that led to the Southport riots. Amnesty International has found that social media platform X played a role in the spread of false narratives and content which incited violence against Muslim and migrant communities. Our analysis of X open source code reveals that the platform's content ranking algorithms prioritize the type of content that can spread misinformation and hate with deeply inadequate safeguards to prevent human rights abuses. Our research demonstrates that these design choices significantly exacerbated human rights risks for racialized communities in the wake of the Southport riots and continue to present a serious human rights risk today. Amnesty International's analysis of X's open source recommender algorithm finds that the algorithm gives top priority to content that drives conversation, even if that conversation is driven by misinformation or hate. This is exacerbated by the artificial amplification of posts from premium verified subscribers, which are paid accounts. These systems enabled toxic, racist, and false content to thrive on X in the wake of the stabbings, which fueled and contributed to violence, including racist attacks. Now, of course, I don't think many people are surprised. We know that social media has done wonders for far-right circles to grow, with lies and misinformation spreading like wildfire. I mean, Twitter is certainly the biggest culprit, what with literal open Nazis crawling the platform. Yet it's still important that we have evidence compiled in a report. Now, earlier on today, I spoke to Pat de Bruyn, head of tech accountability and author of the report, to discuss. Can you briefly summarize what you found on Twitter that led you to believe that the platform contributed to the Southport riots?
Hi, Curtis. Yeah, happy to do so. So we've undertaken a technical investigation of X's algorithm. So basically all the publicly available code that we could get our hands on. And it revealed that there's kind of systematic biases built into the platform that promotes and amplifies content that's likely to elicit very strong reactions and controversy. And we found that very often that will include misinformation and hate speech. And this is combined with changes at X, at the company and the platform, where safeguards have been really done away with and diminished over the past few years. So a combination of those factors, the algorithmic design and these policy decisions, have really combined to create this fertile ground for hate and misinformation and racist content to spread at speed. So yeah, our analysis looked at the algorithm itself. It looked at the combination of these policy choices that have been made. And we also monitored the actual content that was going viral at the time of these racist riots that erupted in various parts of the UK last year. And the overall picture is quite damning. It reveals a platform that is designed to enable really severe human rights harms with an absolute minimum of safeguards in place.
You spoke about some changes. I mean, could you see a dramatic change in the way the behavior of the algorithm and the way posts are recommended when Elon Musk took over? Or has it been more gradual?
Well, I think it is important to acknowledge that, we at Amnesty have been documenting problems with Twitter as it then was for many years. It wasn't some perfect social media platform where we're free of harms and human rights issues prior to Musk's takeover. And we've been stating this publicly and campaigning on it since at least 2018. We had a report that came out back then called Toxic Twitter. We had another follow-up piece of research in 2020. And back then, we also found that it was rife with abusive content, harassment targeting women and gender minorities, for example, in the public sphere. So many of these problems are long-standing, but I do want to say as well, we didn't have, researchers didn't have the tools to be able to really analyze the algorithm that was like at the backbone of the platform back then. So it's very hard to make a direct comparison in the algorithm itself. But what we do know based on our analysis is that the algorithm, based on the most recent information that X has made available, is hardwired for harm. And what we also know is that under Elon Musk, there's been a range of regressive decisions and choices made that have really exacerbated these issues. So you may be aware, that there's this new system whereby premium users or verified subscribers, as they're known, who can get blue ticks. It used to be that only kind of verified people, notable personalities, public figures would do this. And now it's a paid model. So basically anyone, no matter what kind of hate or misinformation they want to spew, can just pay for extra amplification. And our analysis of the source code of the algorithm shows that those who are paying can have their tweets, their posts amplified far more than the average user. In addition to that, they have fired many, if not all, of their content moderators. They have done away with a lot of their trust and safety teams. And of course, they've made big changes to their speech policies as well to enable and allow much more abusive and hateful speech that does not align with human rights responsibilities and standards. And another important point another a policy decision I would point to in the context of the UK is Elon Musk's decision after his takeover to reinstate previously banned accounts. And that includes the likes of Tommy Robinson and Andrew Tate and others who obviously are notorious far right figures who have been who were previously banned for their like hate speech and other harmful behavior on the platforms. And those people were reinstated, and they ended up playing a very prominent role in the amplification of harmful content and misinformation in the context of this racist violence that erupted last year. So as we can see in totality, under Elon Musk, there has been a serious deterioration. It's hard to say exactly how the algorithm changed because these things are quite opaque. It's a bit of a black box. But when we look at the full picture, it's clear that things have gotten much worse.
Yeah, and you mentioned misinformation. I think it's obviously very clear that there's been a lot more harmful, outright racist content. I mean, I think even for the average user, you don't need to look at the backlog, the source code. You can see it. It's very visual, very open in your face. But misinformation is also a very big issue. Can you talk to us about that and what's happened over the last couple of years, and how far back do you think that misinformation on Twitter has really sort of captured the platform?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at kind of the new speech policies that have been introduced under Elon Musk. He has repeatedly stated and gone on the public record to say that he thinks content moderation as a concept is a kind of form of censorship, and that rules and regulations that have been introduced in order to try and bring misinformation to heel, to reduce it, and to make social media less toxic are forms of censorship. And he's pushed back very hard against them. And the platform policies have really reflected this kind of ideology that he has sought to instill across the platform. And this is manifested in different ways. For example, we saw one of the first things that he did was to withdraw from an important voluntary code of conduct that the EU had created, for example, on mis and disinformation. That was an early signal, I think, of how he and the company was intending to approach these things going forward. And as you said, it's almost common sense now. You just need to open your X feed and you see so much vitriol, so much misinformation. And I think what's important with this research is that we've been able to verify a lot of that by looking under the hood and doing that technical work that hopefully can enable some accountability. Because from a human rights perspective, this is not acceptable. Companies like X have human rights responsibilities, and they're clearly failing to uphold them in this case.
I mean, we've seen more and more reports that are coming out and saying that there's lots of bots on the internet. Sort of proving the dead internet theory is true, exposing bots on social media, and Twitter has a lot of them. In any of your findings, have you seen a sort of a correlation between bots and far right content?
We didn't include a systematic study of bot behavior or prevalence in this particular research. But one thing I would say on that front is that as part of our analysis, we did come across changes to the Blue verified system that I mentioned before, whereby verification requirements, so identity verification requirements, were greatly reduced. So you can imagine that creates a situation whereby inauthentic accounts, whether it's bots or people posing as others or whatever it may be, have less verification requirements, and therefore are able to pose as others or engage in inauthentic behavior at scale. Obviously, with the rise of generative AI and AI in general, it's possible to engage in this kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior, as it's known, at scale in a way that previously wasn't possible. So the ingredients are out there for various actors who may be on the far right to engage in this kind of behavior to flood the platform should they so wish, but it wasn't specifically part of this study.
Now, Sasha Deshmukh says that nothing has really changed for online safety, and this is a year on from the riots. I mean, do you think the Online Safety Act, and a lot of people have criticisms of the bill, do you think it can address some of this?
So the Online Safety Act, I mean, we had certain concerns about it when it was in draft form. Although I would say, first and foremost, I think it's important to say we as Amnesty, we absolutely believe that regulation of social media, of big tech, of the internet is an absolutely vital tool that must be taken on by regulators, by governments to bring these companies to account. They have largely existed in a space of self-regulation for years, for decades. And we really see that as a root cause of so many of the societal and human rights harms that we are now experiencing. That long-term development of this toxic business model whereby they're surveilling us en masse, collecting our intimate personal data, and then designing algorithms to addict and engage us and keep our eyeballs on platforms for as long as possible, no matter the cost, meaning that they will prioritize the most harmful content so that we will stay on the platform. And the societal human rights impacts are clear, I think, to many of us by now. So we do need regulation, but we also need good regulation. And as you said, the Online Safety Act is a deeply imperfect piece of legislation. So, much of it has just come into force. So it's quite early to say exactly how effective or ineffective it will be. But we have been quite clear from the beginning that it has significant gaps, that there are still significant gaps that make it unlikely that these harms will be appropriately addressed. So we're calling for those gaps to be filled, as in we need to see mandatory human rights due diligence on the part of big tech companies so that these algorithms are actually subject to appropriate oversight and accountability so that they can't fuel this type of violence and offline harm. But there are some aspects of the Online Safety Act that are, relevant in this case. It does give powers to Ofcom, to the government, to investigate the companies, to demand information, to hold them to account, and potentially, where violations have been found, to incur penalties. And we do need to see that. At least that is a step forward to the pure self-regulation that existed before. But as we've said, there are still a lot of gaps, there are still a lot of problems. So we do also need to see those addressed as well.
That was Pat D. Brune from Amnesty and author of the report. Asher, I'll quickly go to you. I mean, I can go ahead and assume you're not surprised by this, but what's your response to the evidence that Twitter is deliberately stoking hate and misinformation?
Yeah, I guess I'm not obviously surprised by that, but I also think, I mean, look, I don't know this area very well, so this is just like my general feeling is that there was a time on the left where we really didn't know which position to have. I mean, there's different positions on this, on like what you should take. Let me just start from the beginning. On like, what is our position on fascists? Obviously, we oppose fascists, but do we ask the state or do we ask institutions to ban fascists, or do we ban them ourselves? Right? That's the first question. So there are political organizations on the left who say we should go to the state, these organizations, and people shouldn't march to our streets. And there's people much more in my political tradition that are like, we don't need to ask the state to ban them. We will ban them in the streets with our fists if we have to, right? And so that political tradition says the reason we don't ban them from the state isn't because we think we're some like, I mean, I think free speech is very important, but it's because ultimately the bans on them will hurt us more. And so if we see that that's demonstrated over and over again, and this again isn't speaking to the fact that Elon Musk is probably a fascist and is probably pushing for this. I'm not denying that. But if you look at Meta, for example, Meta owns Facebook and Instagram, they are far more restrictive on, I don't know about right-wing speech, but certainly left-wing speech, especially anti-imperialist and pro-Palestinian speech, consistently anti, right? Look at TikTok. I don't know if any of you guys are into TikTok, but in TikTok, it's like if you're making TikTok videos, you can't even use any of the words that is remotely tied to Palestine. And actually, and we found this consistently, and I don't know if there's any research on this, but it's like almost a running joke. If you put an Israel flag on your Twitter handle, and people have found this to be the case, but don't quote me on this, it like consistently will have more views, and so there's, they've been pushed into the position of having to do this because the ADL, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Zionist organization in America, said our biggest threat is TikTok and the kind of, because to them, it's all a comm strategy. It's not the fact that like people are acutely aware that their money is going to incinerate children as they sleep in Gaza. So to them, it's all a comm strategy. So they have to shut this down. And there's been a conscious and deliberate effort to do that with TikTok. With Twitter, it is the case that like you're not really restricted. You can post pro-Palestinian things, especially in the U.S. where there's far more free speech, especially around so-called prescribed organizations and what they're doing. That kind of speech has historically, I don't know about anymore, but historically been protected in the U.S. Whereas in Britain, for example, attacks on institutions that were arming the genocide, those were far more protected until recently, until the Labour government came in. And those weren't protected in America, whereas speech isn't really protected in Britain and speech is protected in America. So, for example, there's loads of examples of this even recently. So what that means is that, like, actually, of course, them stoking fascism is bad, but also the fact that they've been like, they're sort of almost militantly free speech that we haven't. There are obviously times when people have been kicked off Twitter or whatever, but we actually haven't seen the level of control and restriction even remotely close to how much we've seen in other platforms like meta platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and definitely TikTok. So I guess I'm not trying to shift that. I'm saying, yes, I don't know this research. I haven't read the research and it doesn't surprise me, but I'd rather really, as long as we're using these platforms, and I'm still on Twitter, and Blue Sky, no offense, it's kind of dead right now, right? So it's like, it's just like, it's too nice. People don't want to be there. Like, everyone's just like, you're the best. Like, nobody wants that. So it's like, Twitter is where you're going to actually get the largest impact. It's also all the press is on there. All the media establishment are there. So if you get something big on Twitter, it's a way of things becoming news. Now, this is not me advocating for Twitter, certainly not. But I'm saying that until we get a sort of alternative, these are the institutions we use, and they're certainly better than existing institutions like the BBC. I was supposed to be on BBC last night, do like 5 different shows, and they wrote me like a couple hours before, being like, "Sorry, we saw a tweet, me literally saying I'm going to be on BBC, saying I'm going to be on BBC tonight on these different shows, talking about state recognition, and that's meaningless as our government continues its distraction." And also that like Israel's like acting like they don't want it when there's 147 countries that already recognize Palestine, and it means nothing when this country is actively exterminating any Palestinians. So it's like from both sides. So because I said that, they're like, we can't do this because this is too much bias. And I was like, yeah, I'm biased against the genocide. Fine, I don't care. But it just speaks to the fact that here I'm posting on Twitter, which everyone's like, oh, it's this big bad thing, which it is bad. Don't get me wrong. But then because of that, which was like BBC's like, we're not even going to have you on the show. So like, to me, I'm like, these institutions are way, way worse, and like these are the ones that advocated with no alternative views consistently for wars of aggression, the Iraq war, illegal wars, even until recently. Even recently they've been terrible on Gaza, but we've just seen, and they're the ones who mediate it. Whereas at least on Twitter, there's some possibility that we can push back.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.